The barn on the North Road, there was a barn there, and it was a pretty big one, had the Prohibition cellar in it. And when they tore that barn down, which was several years ago, everybody held their breath because they thought for sure that's where she was, in that Prohibition cellar.
All over Cutchogue, the rumor had been for years that Louise was buried under a barn on the North Fork in Cutchogue, on Cox's Lane, that there was a barn there that existed at the time of Prohibition, and that someone had built a cellar under that barn to store liquor in during Prohibition, and that she was buried under there. That rumor was so widespread that at some point in the 70s or 80s, when that barn was torn down, a crowd actually gathered, thinking, oh, now we'll know what happened to this mystery.
I don't think he killed her. I don't think he had the nerve to kill her. My father was all about my father. He was all about Albin.
I never, deep down my own personal opinion, I never thought that Albin did away with his wife. Yeah, he was mean. He had a mean streak, but I don't think he was a kind that would murder his wife. Not really.
You know, at one time I did think that Albin did it. I did. Just the way he acted, you know, I mean, towards her before this had happened, you know. Yeah. I mean, if my husband talked to me like that, he'd be out of this house in no time.
The last few years of my parents' life, we had a live-in aide, and she took off every other weekend. So every other weekend, I was here taking care of my parents, and we were sitting down having dinner one night, and I don't know how it came up. You know, he talked a lot about older times, right. My grandparents and growing up, and then your father's name popped up, and you know, and then of course your mom's name came up, yeah. and I don't know how it came about, but my father says, I'm absolutely sure of it, that Patrick killed Louise. He goes, I have no doubt. I mean, he wouldn't make something up like that. I mean, he was your father's best friend for years. He's Jimmy's godfather. He was, you know, they walked to school together. But I don't know. He didn't elaborate much on it, just that he felt confident that it was your dad, that it wasn't anybody else.
Albin had a vicious temper. I always thought he had a vicious temper. I thought he did it totally. And a farmer can bury almost anybody, any place. I think she's dead.
We were in a golf cart, and under a clear blue sky, he says to me, Joe, he says, you know, I had an insurance policy on Louise. Polish National Alliance is the name of the company he got the policy from. And he says, I can't collect. I said, well, the reason you can't collect is your wife has never been legally declared dead. And woman's missing. Don't you want to find her? Hell with the policy. Find my wife.
He was all about Albin. He had the, you know, the best potatoes, the best strawberries, and he did have good strawberries, I have to say. He was a good farmer. Potatoes was the primary crop, but he did grow cauliflower and strawberries. He would have strawberries across the street, and then he would pick them for market. Then he would take them to Riverhead, and they'd auction them off. Then he'd have you pick them yourself, and then people would come and just pick them yourself, and he had steaks. But there was always people that wanted to go past the steaks because he had Jersey bells, and they were beautiful. They would actually shine. And if he caught you, oh my God, it was the wrath of God came upon you. He would yell and curse and everything else in English, in Polish, whatever. It was a nightmare for you.
He was very active in the Cutchogue Fire Department, was the chief at one point, was a commissioner at one point, head of the Cauliflower Association at another point. And he was on the board of the co-op that owned that very controversial labor camp on Cox's Lane, just a half mile from his farm. Al never paid a social price for the incredible oddity of having a missing wife.
Because Albin was a leader in the farming community, He was a go-to for the media. The New York Times did a profile on him. It was a story in 1982. It was a particularly bad year for potatoes on Long Island, and their go-to for that story was Albin. Jimmy Breslin, the most noted columnist of his day, did a column for Newsday where he referred to Albin. In 1974, about 8 years after he had last seen his wife, Albin went to the courts to get a divorce.
Then he got remarried, which is what his main mission was, to get remarried. Then he moved to the farmhouse with his wife, and that's where he stayed. He left me nothing. That's how he felt about me. He left me nothing. He left everything to his wife, and she left everything to her kids. Oh, see how they have this here? They got the two headstones here at the foot. She was born, they have born, he died in 76, and there's Bob G in 54. And yeah. And there's Mary and John Zmitrovich. Can you say Zmitrovich? Yeah, these have to be clean. And Albin is behind here all by himself where he should be. A little piece of nothing. And there's an empty spot where Mom should be, but I don't even bother. I'll say a prayer in front of Babji and Jaji.
There's something oddly fitting about the demise of Bill Boken. Here we have someone who all but boasted to his wife when he beat her that he had killed Louise. He's, by all appearances, he's protected by local officials. The action to put him in central isolate, by all appearances, was an effort to protect him.
Unfortunately, Dick died in 2014, and there was a question that I never asked him. I would suspect, knowing how the state's police operates, they probably contacted the district attorney's office and said, you know, hey, this is what we have. The guy's now in a mental institution. It turns out the DA was aware of it because they had had a 90-day commitment that he was getting out, and it was being picked up by 2 Suffolk police officers, and that his wife was issued an order of protection, which falls under the criminal procedure law. But there has to be a district attorney involved. My assumption is that the DA told the state police, we have no body, which was true. That was one thing that really hurt this case. And the second thing, now you have your suspect, your main man, has been declared mentally incompetent.
So we know that in March 1968, he's released from the psych center. Him and his wife, Judy, have restraining orders where they're not to see each other. And from what we found, it appears that they never actually did see each other beyond March 1968 when they had to appear in court. She says in their divorce papers that the last time they saw each other was when he was arrested in December of '67. And he goes on to live in New York City. We know that much. We're not sure how much he returned to the island, if at all, after 1968. We have found some record of him in New York City, living in Manhattan. We found some record of him living in Queens. There's a couple of ways that we were able to piece together his relationship with his family after 1968. One is the will of his father. There was some money that was left for him, and interestingly enough, when they tried to get that money to him, he declined to take it. And there's paperwork to the effect of him saying, or lawyers speaking on his behalf, or family members speaking on his behalf, saying that he doesn't want to give his address for them to send this money that was owed to him. And when his wife sold their house in Southold, he was owed $15,000 at the time. A lawyer for Boken's sister responds to Judy Terry and says that, you know, they've been in touch with Boken, and he's not sure that he wants to take this $15,000 because he has to say where he is. And, you know, it's At one point, an attorney in a letter to the court says he's clearly a man on the move. You know, this was a guy who from 1968 to 1982 was hardly seen.
There was a youngster who lived in Cutchogue, and he was in the YMCA, he was in the elevator, and he spotted Bokens, and he says, "Hey, I know you. Aren't you from Suffolk? Aren't you Suffolk Town PD?" "No." And he got off the elevator, and that's the last. You never seen him anymore.
In 1982, he was found dead in his apartment. He had been living in an apartment in Ozone Park for about a year.
He makes nothing of his life. He's a taxi driver. He's on welfare. He's living in the city. When they go into his room to find his body, it's surrounded by empty vodka bottles. There's a tragic part of the story that follows the line of Bill Boken.
He never really brought guests over to the apartment, so they didn't really have much to work on to identify family members or anything like that. The cab owner remembered he needed to borrow some money because he was having a dispute over alimony with his former wife, and the owner of the cab company recalled that he had to go to Albany for that. So because of that, the police in New York City at the time of his death, they don't even reach out to his family on Long Island. They reach out to the Albany police and say, "Do you have any Bokens in Albany?" And they got back and said no. And about a month later, after nobody came to claim his remains, he was brought to Hart Island. So Hart Island is New York City's only potter's grave. It's where they bury unclaimed remains. The inmates from Rikers Island go and they perform the services, they do the burials. There's close to 1 million people buried on this island, and that's where Bill Boken ended up.
The problem back then, as I explained, was the Southold Town Police were not civil service. They could hire anyone, with a lot of political people who just got jobs for the sake of being there or knowing the right person. The Southold Town Police are totally night and day from where they were in 1966. They got a lot of good cops now, and they're doing a good job. And everyone now is civil service. It's a total transformation of a police department.
The first action in which the Southold Town Police showed interest in this case was in 2012-2013. The family at that same time, in large part because of the bones that were uncovered at Gilgo Beach, went back to Southold Town and inquired again, what's ever become of this?
She did get a phone call once that they found remains and wanted to know the name of the dentist that Louise was going to. She gave him the name of the dentist, but the guy, he passed away and all his records were gone.
They met Detective Sergeant Joe Conway, who then talked to Dick Fairchild, which is a very important part of the story. The relationship and the contact between a Southold Town detective and the original state trooper investigator on this case really shed a lot of light for us to be able to tell the story as to what happened. We know that Detective Sergeant Conway wrote out some reports, and we know that he asked Suffolk Homicide to come to the old Boken house in Southold to do ground penetrating radar in the basement. The comment of Boken to his wife when he beat her was, "I buried this other woman in the basement." Judy Terry told that to Conway, who then organized through Suffolk Homicide to get some equipment out here, and they searched that basement. The basement, when the Bokens lived there, was dirt. The floor of the basement was dirt. In 2012-2013, it was concrete. They used ground penetrating radar. They said they didn't find anything. And soon thereafter, Detective Sergeant Conway retired. He'd had a long, distinguished career here, and he moved south, and nothing has happened since then. Our story, quite literally, is the first time this story's been told in any meaningful and concise way. We are bringing Louise back to life. We are giving Sandy, her daughter, what she should have gotten a long time ago, which was the closest thing to the truth about what happened to her mom. Maybe now someone can pick it up and do something with it.
I hope it will bring me something. You know, I know she's not coming back. I know she's gone. And I think me putting her name on a tombstone might help too, but I know a lot more now than I did before. A lot more is coming out. A lot more is coming out. So hopefully it will help and give me some closure. It won't bring her back, but we do know a lot more.
We know what happened. That's the sad thing. We know who did it. And yet there's no closure for the family. I mean, you know, if we could find Louise's body and bring her home, I think it would go a long way for the family.
As time passed, you kind of kept forgetting about it, you know, and then once in a while it would come up in your mind and such. But I don't know, it's like she was dead, you know. Yeah. She was gone so long.
When I wanted to light a candle for my mother, so I walked over and lit a candle. And when I was done, of course my father was sitting there and he goes, "Who did you light the candle for?" I said, "Mom." And he said, "You just can't get over it, can you?" And I said, "No, I can't." I said, "I can't get over it." I said, "The town can't get over it." I said, "It seems to me the only one that can get over it is you." People, you know, want to protect the people that are left behind, but I'm left behind too.
How does that make you feel?
Left behind. I mean, they're left behind because they don't want to be hurt, but I'm left behind. If it was their mother, how would they feel? I like to have some closure. You know, they want to be protected. They want to be protected. Nobody protected me. Nobody protected me. They just swept it under the rug and didn't care. Now everybody wants to be protected.